Welcome back, my rogues. Today's question is parents who call their child by their middle name. Why didn't you just use their middle name as their first name? Hope you enjoy, and check me out on Instagram. Thank you. I found out one morning in first grade that I didn't know my first name. I had no idea who the teacher was calling lol. My friend went by his middle name because he is the third. My maternal grandmother went by her middle name Josie because when she was born from my understanding either the priest and or the Catholic Church said that her first name had to be a saint's name, so my great-grandmother was like fine and picked her random saint's name, and kept calling my grandmother Josie. My guy is named after his late father, so to avoid confusion he went by his middle name. I know him by his first name, but whenever I'm with his mum I end up calling him by his middle name because that's what she calls him. My parents had two names that they loved, but thought the flow of my full name was awkward and choppy when the name they intended to call me came first, so they just switched him and always referred to me by my middle name. My family calls me by my middle name because me, my dad, and my grandpa have the same name. My family calls me by my middle name because my stepsister and I have the same first name. At first they called us both first name middle name, but it evolved to us both being called by our middle names. My family uses first and middle names interchangeably. It's only when both names are used that you know you're fucked. First, middle and last, write your will. Even as a 32-year-old woman I get a cold sweat when both my names are used. Even the kids go wide-eyed when both names are used for anyone. Changing the specific names for privacy. My cousin is John Doe Smith. His dad is John David Smith. His dad is John D. Smith, just the one letter, and his dad was John D. Smith. He goes by Doe to everyone to keep things simple. His dad goes by David and his grandpa goes by John. Doe has already said he will not continue the tradition because of how difficult things can be for him, since almost nobody looks deeper than John D. Smith, and there's 3 of them who live on the same block, 2 of them in the same house. How else do you think George Foreman calls his kids? My parents promised to name me after my grandmother, and with her knowledge blessing made that my first name so it would be official, and chose my middle name to be what I'm called by. My sister, on the other hand, was already named when my dad saw a celebrity with that name that he thought was trashy, and didn't want my sister associated with her, so they just switched to the middle name. Easy enough since I was already doing it. Not apparent that I go by a middle name. My parents realized after a few weeks I didn't suit my first name for whatever reason. It just didn't feel right. They then tried my first middle name, which also felt wrong. Luckily I suited the last middle name. I've considered changing my name to get the order right, but it's a massive hassle for not much gain. Plus the flow of my full name currently sounds better than having my preferred name first. Not apparent, but I'm 99% sure my great-grandparents American-born and full-blood Norwegians and living in a Norwegian town in the USA did that so my grandfather would have a normal English first name of Seth but called him by his first middle name of Erlen, which is variant transcription of the name Erland Old Norse. My grandfather used Erlen in every aspect of his life after he was 18. My husband's first name is Dixon. He chose to go by his middle name. My dad grew up going by his middle name because his first name is named after his uncle. I'm sure this is probably pretty common. My grandmother wouldn't let me be called by my first name because I was named after her. I was then not allowed to be called my second name because it was her mother's name. So my parents had to slap on a third name so I could be called something. My first name is but my grandfather and great-grandfather were both also named and were both still living at the time of my birth. So my family took calling me by my middle name, edit spelling. I have indirect info for one possible reason that says me brother dirtbag is Logan Brian T. But mum wanted Brian Logan T, so half his docs say Logan Brian and half say Brian Logan. Thankfully most places like governments etc. don't seem to be bothered so much by this inconsistency, leads me to believe it's more common. My friend growing up went by his middle name because he shared a name with his father. Interestingly, his younger brother's name was the English version of that same name my friend and his father had, the French variant. My dad was raised by his middle name for no obvious reason and he hated it. I went by my middle name through middle and high school to feel closer to him through all the girly puberty crap, as my mum named me a more feminine version of dad's name. A weird question we've been asked a lot is what we call our kid after we introduce her. I have seen people ask her when she introduces herself. 2. This is kid's name. Oh. Do you call her Kid? No, because her name is Kid's name. It's only 3 syllables, as is mine, and people don't try to shorten mine. I think it's weird. If I wanted to call my kid something other than her name, I would have named her that. From someone close to me, it was sort of a family tradition. My husband Christopher wanted his first son to have his first name but not his middle name. And we both agreed not to call him Christopher, as long as Christopher was in there somewhere. Hubs was happy. We just thought Christopher Jason sounded better than Jason Christopher. It really was that simple. By the way, our other 3 kids go by their first names. I know someone who was always going to be called by her middle name, but her parents decided first name middle name sounded more correct when said together, obviously. I'm not gonna say her name here, but pretend you wanted to name your pet Red. What sounds better? Big Red Dog, or Red Big Dog? My parents gave me a normal girl's middle name. I have 3 middle names and a weird first name. They always gave me the choice to be called by my first name or my middle name. I love my first name, and wouldn't go by anything else, but my parents did give me the option. I know 4 people who have always gone by their middle names. All of them were given a first name that sounds better when said first. Their parents liked the way they sounded when said as a full name, but when shortened the middle name fit him the best. My aunt goes by her middle name. Her first name is Geraldine. I have a friend who is going to be called his middle name. His mother changed her mind right before he was born, and his first and middle name were swapped around. His family refers to him mainly as the middle name. When I asked his why they called him that, I was introduced to him by his first name. He explained it to me. He actually hates getting called by his middle name, but his family doesn't keep that in mind. I always call him by his first name, unless I'm teasing him, all in good fun, of course. My father named me a unique name and fucking everybody hated it. Apparently by month 6 every single person, including my father, was calling me by my middle name. Now I have this weird name on all of my legal documents. I am the kid in this situation, but long story short, Papa was a meth addict that liked to beat women in his spare time. And guess who got stuck with his name as a first name? Him changing it as soon as possible. My brother goes by his middle name. His first name is after a relative that my parents really wanted to honor, and his second name is the one they picked, that they wanted to call him. The full name simply sounded better with the relative's name first when said in order. I've been called by my middle name my whole life. Story has it that my mum named my 2 older sisters, and when A Son That's Me was produced, my father decided it was his turn to name the child Mum Didnt. Like the name he picked, so just started calling me by my middle name. Not a parent's, but my dad's side has 8 generations of the same name. He didn't want to fuck up the tradition, but also wanted me to have a unique name. First name is the 9th and middle name is what I go by. My aunt named my cousin Jaden. She had never met anyone with that name and thought it was so unique. It wasn't until she enrolled him in daycare preschool that she realized how popular his name was. There had never been fewer than 3 Jadens in this kid's class his whole academic career. His middle name is Joseph, so he's been Joey pretty much since he was 3. My granny and her siblings all went by their middle names. I didn't know my granny's real name until I visited her in hospital and told her she was in the wrong bed. Her siblings were worse. I didn't find out they went by their middle names until we turned up to their respective funerals. I'm someone who goes by their middle name. My parents always knew they wanted to call me by the name I go by, but they realized my name sounded better in the middle name spot. Not me, but my mum only goes by her middle name. No one ever calls her by her first name. Don't know if this is true, but from what I heard, my grandma wanted my mum to have a Christian name. Even though no one in my family is really religious, grandma might have been at the time. Not sure, but my grandma's never called my mum by her first name. For the longest time I thought my mom's middle name was her first name. She didn't want to have to share her name with anyone, and her mother had passed away about 5 years earlier. My mother surprised her at the hospital with the name choice. My mother was stubborn and said the birth certificate was already done, even though wasn't, and they just added a second middle name. I'm called by another name, not my middle name, because my mum had my name picked out, but my father's family didn't like it. It's a flower. She calls me by my right name, and so do all my friends. My husband goes by his middle name because all of the men in his family do. Generation 7 of men going by their middle name because they all share the same first name.
Hope you liked this video. Stay frosty, my rebels.